Let's progress further now by looking at including further metadata. This time we won't be looking at the feed, we'll be looking at episode 1. So by selecting it down here, I can now come back up to the top and enter the textual metadata here. I'll start off by giving this episode 1 a title. This will be more specific than the general title you give for the overall feed. I'll title it Parallel Circles Chapter 1. And then, below, for this particular episode, I can add in a description to go with it. Therefore, I'll type this. The opening chapter introduces the sinister Manchester landscape decades after the 2017 English Civil War. Now, even though I've only added text here, whatever I do add, whether it's text, images, hyperlinks, whatever, this will appear in the description field when our podcast is live. And then working right down to the bottom left here of this description area, you're going to see this checkbox. Import HTML file. Now you might or you might not know what an HTML file is. If you do, and you've already got one created, you would check in here and navigate to the particular file that you've already created using a website creation program such as Dreamweaver. There are other programs of course, but Dreamweaver is the one I use. Now just before I do this though, right at the far right here, by clicking on this pencil tool, this allows me to edit. And this allows me to edit the global podcast options. I'm not going to do anything here. I'm not going to change any of these radio buttons, but essentially what this is offering us is, you know, when you see a podcast live, I would imagine 99% of the time there will be a photograph associated with it, or a graphic or whatever. Well, you can work your way through these 3 radio buttons and the checkbox to specify the size that you want to use. But do notice this doesn't apply to iTunes. iTunes has its own tab. We'll get to that later. So really, you would only be using these global options here if you were hosting the MP3 file on your own website. Anyway, I'm going to cancel that. And instead, as I said, if you click on here, if you've already got an existing HTML file set up within a website, then you can navigate through to find it by using this button. Now, as you can see, I've got quite a few websites at the moment I'm working on for particular clients. The one I'm going to use is this one down here, Studio Energy. It's just a temporary site I use when I'm trying things out. Now, I could choose the index file there, which is the main page, the home page, or because I've set up a particular folder for podcasts, I can open this up and choose from either of these 2 here. I've actually created 2 distinct pages. Well, for our example, I'm going to choose this one, Parallel Circles. I'm sure you would have guessed I was going for that one. And then simply click on Open. Now, even though I've got that page set up, in reality, it's a blank page. So there is no textual information, whether that's readable for the user or metadata. There isn't any of that. So in fact, I'm actually going to uncheck it. But at least you know that option is there, if like me, you also design your own websites. By the way, just before we move on, within the description field up here, you can see that we do get some textual tools. Pretty much like any word processor, we can change the font and the size, etc., etc. For example, with just one word, Manchester, I could change the font. Okay, and then eventually that would reflect within our podcast. Now working our way down further to this internet link URL, well, I'm actually going to copy and paste what we used for the feed URL. Okay, so just simply copying and pasting there allows me to use the same one. As we already know, we've got the audio file set up. And as I've alluded to previously, if you do want to change the publication date and time, just simply click on here and change it to whatever you want to change it to. Okay, now let's come back up to the top and we'll look at this Extras tab. Within here, you can add further metadata, such as the author's email address. I'll make one up, but of course you would use a real one, so that anybody viewing or listening to your podcast will be able to see this textual information and get in touch with you should they want to. Working my way down to the category, well, I'm going to describe the sort of thing this is. It's a dystopian novel, so I'll type in dystopian fiction. Of course, you being a user of Groove 3, what you do here will be more music related, of course. And therefore, whatever your podcast is about, maybe it's a monthly showcase of who's been in your studio, well, you would write in here appropriately. Okay, now I'm going to leave everything else, but I'll come across to the 3rd tab, iTunes, just in case you want to upload your podcast to iTunes. Well, as you can see initially, it doesn't appear that you can do anything. Well, you can, of course. You have to check in that first checkbox, iTunes extension, and then give yourself a subtitle and a summary. I'm just going to write in a load of rubbish, but you get the idea. This is all textual metadata that will show up within iTunes, should you publish to it. I suppose quite importantly down here for keywords, you need to write in search terms that possibly people who have never heard of you but do have a similar interest. Well, what search terms would they type in when they are searching through iTunes, looking for podcasts that they are interested in that is parallel to your interests? So I'll type in a couple of keyword search terms here. As a musician or an engineer, you would probably type that in: musician, engineer, recording studio, your local area town or city or whatever. Anything that you think would be a key word that the end user would be using to search for similar podcasts to what you've just generated. You don't have to fill all of this in, but you can do. So with the author, for example, well, I'll fill my name in. And to help iTunes and the potential audience, just indicate how long your podcast lasts for. So with my duration, I'm going to pretend at the moment it lasts for a couple of hours. I know it doesn't really with our example, but you get the idea. At the far right here, we have some options. Is your podcast explicit or not? Well, mine isn't, so I'll leave it at no, but you can see these three options. And really, that's pretty much it. We've now recorded a podcast. We've added some music to it. We are using Wavelab's podcast workspace here to add in textual information, metadata, images, the actual audio file itself, and any links that we want to include. So really now we need to upload our files, the feed and the actual episode, to wherever we are going to be hosting it. Now in my case, as we saw a few moments ago, I'm hosting it on a temporary site I use when I'm trying things out. Now to be able to do this, you need to come up to the Publish button, and then you're going to see all these options. The most important option first, though, is to set up the FTP, the File Transfer Protocol, i.e. the passwords and the name and the user, etc., that will have been provided to you by your hosting company, so that you can upload anything, whether it's a text file, a photograph, an MP3, whatever, to that hosting package that you have bought. Now I can't tell you what to fill in here for the host and the username and a password. You will have those three things provided to you by your hosting company. As you can understand, every single one is different. If you've not got them, you will have to have a word with the hosting company to get them to provide them to you. I'll not go into the details here why you should use passive mode, but you should. It's better, quicker, safer, and to be quite honest, most hosting companies insist. And then just underneath, fill in these two fields appropriately, pertinent to the exact folder or the exact directory on your hosting site. Again, this is going to be something specific to you and your hosting company and how you've probably designed your website. But once you are done, simply hit OK. Great stuff. Now down here, right at the bottom, you're going to see all these different buttons that allow you to upload, download, etc., etc. However, the exact same options are back up here under Publish. So in my case, I've got everything set up. So I'll click on here. Update all items on FTP. It's going to be very quick. So as soon as I click it now, well, there you go. It was very quick, as predicted. So I'll click on Finish, and what I'll do is I'll move over to my web design program that I use, Dreamweaver, and I just want to check that those files have been uploaded to my hosting server. Now, if you are completely new to Dreamweaver, or website design in particular, just bear with me while I do this. All I'm doing is connecting to the hosting server through Dreamweaver here in exactly the same way as we did with Wavelab via FTP, using exactly the same credentials, the passwords. But now I see two views. The view I'm looking at the moment is the view of all the files and the folders, the website structure in effect, of what I've got on my hard drive on my laptop. But it's not complete now because we've just uploaded via Wavelab those relevant podcast files. So what I need to do is connect to my hosting directory. So I'll click on here, and then clicking on this button allows me to see, well, on the right hand side, what's on my hard drive for my laptop, and on the left hand side, everything that's on the hosting server. And as you can see down at the bottom there, those couple of files that we've just uploaded via Wavelab. Well, that's fine, but I do want them on my hard drive as well, because remember me saying earlier on, the only website pages I've set up at the moment are blank pages. What I would need to do is use that MP3 file and related files, and then build the podcast around it, making it available so that anybody can see it once they know the address. Okay, so that's all done, and now we see it over here within my files panel. Those couple of files have now been brought in, and they reside also on my hard drive for my laptop. And in fact, if I double click on this podcast XML file, then in the main viewing area here, you're going to see all this code written, not by us, but by Wavelab. And all that information that I typed in, i.e. it's a talking book podcast of the novel, Parallel Circles by Mark Struthers, etc., etc., and the actual link, That's Studio Energy, Co-UK, Podcasts, etc. Well, all that's been sorted out for us. And even down here, where we changed the font for just that one word Manchester, well, we can see there that the font family is MS Mint Show, which is what we changed it to within Wavelab. And even down here, we see all these lines of code pertinent to iTunes. Remember the domain and the subtitle and the summary and the keywords and the author and even the duration. Okay, so that's what we can do then with Wavelab, which takes it a step further than using Audition that we have done earlier in the course. Using Audition brilliantly allows us to create a podcast, but using Wavelab has this extra facility built in. Now, I'm going to leave it here for this tutorial, and in the next tutorial, I'm going to look at a different way that we can use podcasts, our podcasts, i.e. using a third-party hosted solution. So, I'll see you in a moment.